Hi everyone, it's Allison, and today I'm going to be talking about every single book. Well, not every single one because I don't count the books that I read for school. But anyway, so I'm going to talk about all 120 books that I read in 2020. Yeah, I haven't looked over all of these books. I just have my Goodreads pulled up and I'm going to scroll up from it, starting with my first book. And some of them might not really be in order because I don't always add things right after I read them. But yeah, so I'm gonna start with the first book that I read in 2020, and that was The Female Persuasion by Meg Wolitzer. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. I don't really remember much that happened. I just know it's about college students, and it's not really, I guess it's one of those books that sort of centers around different characters as they go throughout their lives, which I discovered I enjoy books like that. So yeah, so the next book I read was The Banker's Wife by Christina Alger. This book was really meh. I didn't think it was that exciting. It was sort of fun. I just think it's interesting, all the secret bank accounts in the Cayman Islands and all that. So that's pretty fun. Then I read Little Women, gave it 5 stars. I loved it. I think I'm gonna read it again soon. Yeah. Okay, next was Prep. I really like this book. Not really much to say about it. It definitely made me really sad. But I love boarding school, elite private school books. They're just really fun for me. Okay, next was Radio Silence, 5 stars. This is probably one of my favorite books this year. I read this book in February. That was during a time when I was really stressed about my college applications and all that and what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And this book definitely made me question everything. I was like, oh shoot, maybe I don't want to go to university. And yeah, and now I'm at university. Well, not right now, but I'm a first year at university. And I don't know if I want to stay in school because I don't find it fulfilling. And I related a lot to the main character. I forget her name. I always forget character's name. Next book was Bad Girls with Perfect Faces. I don't remember this book well, but I know it was really absurd. It was entertaining, it was fun, I guess. But pretty meh. Next was Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. This book, a lot of people have been talking about this year. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very easy to read, and I liked the discussion about race. It was insightful and then also juicy. The plot was exciting and fun. Next was The 7 Deaths or 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. This book, it was fun and interesting, but I just think it was a little bit too confusing for me. Maybe I'm just too dense to understand everything, but it was just it's one of those time loop things and everything, and I was about this is way too complicated. I just want to enjoy this book, but it was making me think too much. So yeah. Next was I read a memoir called Unfollow, a memoir of loving and leaving the Westboro Baptist Church. Amazing. I love it. And how the author talks about how she had all of these really bigoted, horrible opinions and how they changed over time. And I think it's really important to know how people change. And yeah, and I also just really love discussions about religion and all that. So it was very well written. Next book was There by Tommy Orange. I love this book. It was a nice network narrative. I love a good network narrative. Just a little, you see bits of people's lives and they all intersect. I always love those kind of books and movies. And yeah, this was very sad. The only thing that made me not like it was I feel there were a bit too many, there were a little too many characters. So I just have really bad character recognition or all that. So yeah, but overall it's good. Next I read Northanger Abbey. I enjoyed this. It was pretty fun. Not much to say about it. Then I read Dear Edward. Oh my gosh, this book was devastating. I don't really remember much that happens. I just remember it's this little boy is the only survivor in a plane crash, and I cried. Yeah. Next book I read was All the Bright Places. I read this because I wanted to see the movie, and I know people have different mixed feelings about this, but it made me cry. It was very relatable for me in certain ways, and the movie also made me cry. So yeah. Next book I read was Middlesex, which I know is very widely praised. It was well written. I just think parts of it were a little bit too, I feel I'm being really judgy, but it was just a little bit, I don't know, just the parts where the author would describe a child's genitals. I was a bit yeah, but I think it was well written. But did I enjoy it? Not really. Next book I read was Rebecca I read this, or like, well, when I was in 5th grade, my teacher read it aloud to our class, so, but I didn't really remember that much about it. And then I read it and I loved it so much. I gave it 4 stars, but I think I'd actually give it 5 stars. And then I haven't watched the new Netflix adaptation yet, but I did watch the Hitchcock version. I loved that as well. But I really liked Rebecca. I think for a classic, it's pretty easy to read, like the writing style. And then I thought it just really gothic and beautiful. Then I read My Sister's Keeper. I thought it was good. I cried at the end. And it takes place in Rhode Island, so that's fun. Next book I read was Find Me, the sequel to Call Me by Your Name. I thought it was like really beautiful, but just not that interesting. Next book I read was Modern Lovers. It was sort of fun, but again, just pretty bland. Next book I read was Between the World and Me. This was a really beautiful book. I always love a good nonfiction. I know a lot of people praise this book, as it should be. Next book I read was The Last Time We Say Goodbye. It was very heavy and sad, and I can't remember if it made me cry, but it probably did, and I gave it 4 stars, so yeah. Next book I read was Odyssey by Homer. I didn't rate this. There were parts, I don't know, it was just hard for me to get into, and also I don't really have a lot of knowledge of like Greek mythology, and I would like to learn more about it. Maybe I'll reread it again in the future after having done more research. Next book I read was The Rosie Project. It was pretty cute, fun, not that special. Next book I read was The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue. This was fun. Yeah, again, like there were parts that I liked, and then parts I was just like, it's kind of bland. Like all like the travel-y stuff, I just got a bit bored, but yeah. Next book I read was Beartown. Oh my gosh, amazing. It takes place in Sweden and just like really beautiful. It's about hockey. I discovered I sort of like sports books, even though I'm like not really a sports person, but this was just a really fun read. Well, not fun, it's really heavy. It's horrible, and it made me so sad, and I got really sad after reading it, but I thought it's really well done. Next book I read was The Astonishing Color of After. I read this because Books and Lala really liked it, and I did not enjoy it at all. Just like all these like dream sequences, I just thought it was really boring, honestly. Next book I read was Starry Eyes, which was, I actually really enjoyed it. It was very cute and fun and camping, and it has a good enemies to lovers, like sort of, well, it's actually like, you know, like friends to lovers to enemies to lovers. I don't know, is that a spoiler? I don't really know. But this was really cute, and also it definitely helped that I pictured the main guy love interest as being Timothée Chalamet. Okay, next book I read was Madame Bovary. I enjoyed this. I actually read this twice this year. Like I read it in April, and then it turned out I had to read it for a class in the fall. Next book I read was We Are Okay. I loved this. It was very beautiful, and Books and Law describes like Nina LaCour's writing style as being very like melancholy, and I feel like that's the perfect word to describe her writing. Just beautiful. Next book I read was Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. It was okay. It was sort of fun, I guess. Definitely very upsetting. Next book I read was Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. This book, it was definitely a very fun read. Like for a thriller, I really only want to have fun reading it. Just the plot to it was just like a little bit too absurd. I was like, really? But it was fun. Next book I read, oh my god, A Little Life. The most I've ever cried reading a book. Wow. Definitely very painful to read. There were parts where I definitely had to like take a moment to like breathe and be like, okay. Whew. But this was definitely the most upsetting book I've ever read. Next book I read was The Hunger Games. I used to be a big Hunger Games fan. It was fun. Yeah. Next book I read was 50 Shades of Grey. No. No. Like, no. Next book I read was Normal People. Loved it. Loved the show. Amazing. I love Sally Rooney's writing style. Yeah, I definitely want to read this again in 2021. The next book I read was My Brilliant Friend. I really enjoyed this. It was very, I love a good, as I said before, books that just like follow different characters like throughout the years, like a good, I think it's a Bildungsroman is what this is called. Yeah. Next book I read was Big Little Lies. This was very fun. I also watched the HBO show, and that was very fun as well. A great cast, and it's definitely different from the book, but both are very fun. Okay. Next book I read was The Truth and Other Lies. I did not like this book at all. I don't really remember the premise. Next book I read was Reading Lolita in Tehran. This memoir, it was very well written, and I definitely think it's a very important piece of nonfiction, but I just found it a little bit boring. Yeah. Next book I read is My Antonia. I enjoyed this. I can't really remember that much about it, so I think it's sort of meh. Maybe I'll read it again in the future. Okay. The next book I read was Nora Webster. This book, I gave it 3 stars, but I feel like I'd actually want to move that down to 2. It just made me really sad. Not that anything really sad happened, I don't think. I just thought it was boring, and just like the monotony of like life, and I was like, wow, it just felt really dull to me. Next book I read was The Wife Between Us. I don't really remember what happened. I just remember that it felt very dumb. Yeah. Okay, next book I read was We Were Liars. Pretty meh. Next book I read was The Wives. Really, really absurd. Hated it. Next book I read was Providence by Caroline Kepnes. I read this because I like reading books about Rhode Island and Providence, and it was like weird, like he was like this guy, he was like super strong and he killed people, and I just thought it was boring and really weird. Next book I read was The Last Time I Lied. This was a very fun thriller. Next book I read was Fight Club. I didn't think I'd like it. I had presumption that like Fight Club was the kind of book that people definitely like use to be like, oh, I'm better than you because I love Fight Club. But I did enjoy this. I haven't seen the movie yet. I don't really know if I want to. Next book I read was The Cabin at the End of the World. I was hooked in like the first 20 pages, but then I got really bored and it was very repetitive. I think this could have really succeeded as a short story. Next book I read was So You Want to Talk About Race. Very insightful, learned a lot. Amazing. Next book I read was Brown Girl Dreaming. This book is written in verse. I thought it was very beautiful. It's sort of like a memoir feel. Next book I read was Station 11 because I wanted to read a book about a pandemic, and this was amazing. Definitely so crazy to read in 2020, and a lot of it felt a little too real, but it was fun. Next book was The Woman in the Window by AJ Finn. This was a fun thriller. I don't remember the plot twist or the resolution or whatever, but it was fun. Next book I read was The Kiss Quotient. This was cute. I was just in the mood to read some romances, but it was sort of meh for me. Like there were parts where it was cute, but then I don't know. I discovered I don't really love reading like super steamy scenes. Like I enjoy like the banter more so. Next book I read was Rewrite Upon Sticks by Quan Berry. I love this book so much. Definitely unlike anything I've ever read. It reminded me of it sort of reminded me of the play Dance Nation. It was very fun. I want to read it again. I want to see it made into a movie. Quan Berry, if you want someone to work on the movie, I'd love to work on the movie. I don't really know how. I have no experience in that whatsoever, but I just think it'd be a fun movie. But it definitely could be very bad as a movie, but I think it'd be fun. Okay, and then I did read the Twilight Saga. The first book I did enjoy. The rest of the series was just so boring. Every book is way too long, honestly. And just, I love the romance, but then parts are just so boring and dull and absurd, and the characters aren't fully fleshed out. They're definitely more fleshed out in the books than the movies, but the movies are just way more fun. So I recommend not reading the books and just watching the movies, because the movies are a good time. The books, not so much. Okay, next book I read was Home Before Dark. This was fun. Yeah, just a fun thriller. Next book I read was The Silent Patient. This is probably my favorite thriller of the year. A lot of people say that they saw the twist coming. I did not. I was very surprised. It was very well done, I think. Next book I read was The Sun Also Rises. This is my first time reading Hemingway. I really enjoyed it. I really like his writing style. Next book I read was Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover. This was good. I did like the romance in this book. This is the kind of romance that I like. I just loved it. And then I cried at the end, like sobbing. Wow. Because I feel like the whole book, like, it wasn't sad, and then the last chunk, I was like, oh my gosh. Okay, and then the next book I read was The Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warming. So this is a non-fiction about, you guessed it, climate change. Very devastating, talks a lot about the consequences. It definitely got a little bit technical, and I am not a sciencey person, so I was like, okay. But yeah, I definitely recommend reading. Next book I read was The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. a fun thriller. Don't remember that much. It wasn't that special to me, but just I love thrillers. Next book I read was Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. This book, nonfiction, I enjoyed it, but then I enjoyed mostly like the anecdotal aspects. I didn't really like so much like, oh, she's like, she is a therapist, she's qualified to give advice, like people read this, they probably want advice, but just a lot of the advice felt very generic and bland. So yeah, next book I read was The Marrow Thieves, a sort of dystopian. It was good. I liked it. Next book I read was Midnight Sun. No, I gave it 3 stars, but I'm gonna go on and change that to 2 because it was really boring. I liked parts of it, and I think just I was in a really nostalgic for Twilight phase, and I still am. I'm definitely a Twihard, but this book did not need to exist, but I think in 2020, yeah, it was sort of a fun little treat. Next book was The Vacationers. It was fun and pretty bland though. Next book I read was American Psycho. I gave this 3 stars. I don't know, I think I'm gonna move that to 2. It just made me so uncomfortable. Then I watched the movie. The movie was pretty fun. Yeah, American Psycho, like, it was fun. Like, it definitely, I do love reading about like really snobby people, but then parts of it were just so graphic that I had to like skim over them because it was just too much. Next book I read was When the Moon Was Ours. I've tried an Anna Marie McLemore book before. I tried to read Wild Beauty, couldn't do it. This book I finished, but I just never really felt into it. Yeah, just didn't really work for me. Next book I read was Disfigured on Fairy Tales, Disability and Making Space. The book was definitely very insightful. It talked about things that I had never even thought about before, which, I mean, obviously that just shows my ability privilege. And this was very well done. I recommend it for everyone. Shoot, I have The Woman in the Window here twice, so that means I actually only read 127 books. Shoot, okay. Okay, next book I read was Sing Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward. This book was really beautiful. Yeah, it's very poetic and yeah, sad. Next book I read was Turbulence. So it's a very short book. You really only get like a chapter, like a few pages about someone's life, then you see how they all like connect, like each chapter starts where the last one left off with a new character, and I love books like that. It was fun. Next book I read was Trust Exercise. This book was well written, but I was very confused and not in like not really in a super fun way, in a way that just felt like, what is going on? The next book I read was 6 Stories. This book was okay. It was sort of fun, like a mystery, but I definitely thought it was very predictable, and it has like a murderer's monologue, which I never really enjoy. Invisible Man was next to this book. It definitely felt very relevant for today, even though I forget when it was written, and it was well done, but I think just the writing style, it just felt very dense, and I didn't really enjoy it. Then parts I was just like, yeah, but I think it's definitely an important conversation that was in this book. Next book I read was Chelsea Wives. This was just really fun. It reminds me sort of like of Big Little Lies mixed with like the Real Housewives mixed with Pretty Little Liars. Just, I love reading about rich people. It was fun. Next book I read was Dark Places. This was also fun. I think I like Sharp Objects better. Next book I read was Hood Feminism. Really good, amazing. Again, like, it talks about issues that aren't typically seen as feminist issues, but they actually are, and very insightful, very informative. Next book I read was The Prince and the Dressmaker. This was a graphic novel. The illustrations were beautiful, all out of fashion. I loved it. It was just very sweet. Next book I read was It Ends With Us, another Colleen Hoover. It made me sob as well. And I also read Dress Codes with Small Towns. It was sweet, but I just not really a fan of the whole like, let's save the town by having a harvest festival. Those kind of plots in books just never really interest me. Okay, All These Beautiful Strangers. This was fun. Another sort of like prep school thing. Yeah. The Death of Mrs. Westaway. This was also a fun thriller. Yeah. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I really enjoyed this. Okay, then I read The Fire This Time. This was beautiful, collection of essays. Yeah, very important. I read Revolutionary Road. It was very dull, I thought. Just that sort of like suburban monotony that makes me sad. Yeah, but not really in like not in a super emotional way, just in a, wow, That's life, kind of way. Moon of the Crusted Snow. This is a short book, a sort of apocalyptic dystopian book. I discovered I definitely love reading books about like the wilderness. Yeah, it was good. Next book I read was Pride and Prejudice. Love Pride and Prejudice. Amazing. Then I read Broken People. This book felt so pretentious. Felt pretentious, and it was also about pretentious characters, which I do like a good pretentious character, but the way it was written just felt pretentious. Just these like the whole like self-discovery, like this like spirituality. Like I love reading about religion and everything, but this just, it was boring. Next I read Get a Life, Chloe Brown. This was sweet. It was fun. Not that I know a lot of people really love this. It was just a fun book. Yeah. The next book I read was Catherine House. I really enjoyed this. Again, dark academia. Loved it. Just, it felt like it was sort of a book about where like nothing really happens. Like I thought it was gonna like build up to stuff, but then it never really got there. But overall it was fun. The next book I read was My Lovely Wife. This book was so gross. I didn't like it. Next book I read was The Hating Game. This was cute and fun. Yeah, I love good enemies to lovers. Yeah. But next book I read was Conversations with Friends. I really enjoyed this. I love Sally Rooney's writing. Again, yeah. Next book I read was The Half-Life of Molly Pierce. I don't remember much about this book. I don't remember, I'm sorry. Next book I read was Writers and Lovers. This book was very well written. Yeah, I enjoyed it, but it didn't feel like that special to me. Next book I read was If We Were Villains. I really enjoyed that. Again, I love dark academia. Next book, Take Me Apart. This book, I thought it would be a lot more thrilling and mysterious than it was, but I just thought it was boring, and it felt like there was really no mystery. Next book I read was Bunny. I really enjoyed this. It was very weird. You definitely see that it's inspired by like Brown University. Like I know that Mona Awad went to Brown, or she like studied there at some point for a PhD or something, and I definitely like saw those vibes in it, which was fun and I liked it, and very wild, very weird. Yeah. Next book I read was The New Wilderness by Diane Cook. I honestly thought that I would love this book a lot more than I did. It's like, I love a good book about like sort of like experimental project, again like the wilderness, but I just thought it was very boring. Okay, next book I read was The Great Believers. Wow, this book was heart-wrenching. I didn't cry though, but it was still amazing. Next book I read was Jillian. This book was okay. It was sort of funny, but also sort of not. Next book I read was Watch Over Me, another Nina LaCour. I loved it. It was just so beautiful, just all the scenery, like it's on a farm, just so well written. Next book I read was Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. I've been wanting to read this for so many years, but then it just like always slips my mind, and I'm glad I read it. I loved it. Next book I read was Dark Matter. This book, so definitely so like mind trippy and all that, and physics, which I definitely want to learn more about. I just love that kind of stuff. Next book I read was The Devil All the Time. I liked it. I liked the movie as well, but not that like special to me, but I thought it was very well written, very disturbing. Next book I read was The Miracle Creek. This book was, wow, so thrilling, definitely a real gripping and a page turner, and very devastating, and definitely the kind of book where you see like that there's so much nuance in a situation from like different characters' perspectives and all that. My next book I read was The Girl in the Mirror. Oh my gosh, this book, it was absurd. It was like just the plot twist and then all that, and it was just so unbelievably bad, and it was just so, yeah, so absurd and ridiculous. I didn't like it. Next book I read was An Anonymous Girl. This book was also ridiculous. It was sort of fun, I guess, but then I got kind of bored and was just like, wow. Okay, next book I read was Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This was so well written, so well done, very hard to read and devastating, but I definitely recommend it. Next book I read was Dear Child by Romy Hausman. This book was like sort of exciting, but then also sort of boring. Okay. Next book I read was The Other's Gold. This is another one of those books where you see like sort of like morally gray areas. Like it's about different, these 4 girls I believe who meet in college, and they all go through like a different thing in life that like sort of shows them like maybe making a mistake and seeing something like sort of morally bad or morally wrong or morally ambiguous that they do, and it was just, I just love that kind of stuff. So this was pretty good. Next book I read was Educated, another memoir that I absolutely loved. Just so amazing. And yeah, next book I read was Recursion by Blake Crouch, because I really liked dark matter, but this sort of felt like sort of repetitive from dark matter. I don't think it really did anything like new or special. Next book I read was Open Book, Jessica Simpson's memoir, another amazing memoir. Next book I read was The Philosopher Queens. Really good, and just you see like short little biographies of different women in philosophy. Next book I read was An Inconvenient Woman. This book was okay. Next book, Flowers for Algernon. Wow, so devastating, so sad. Next book I read was Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. This is when I got into sort of my interstellar phase. I watched Interstellar and I was like, wow, I need to know physics. So yeah, this book, definitely recommend it if you want to know a little bit about physics, because I know nothing about physics really. Yeah, but enjoyable. Next book, A Gentleman in Moscow. I really liked this. I thought it was very well written and again atmospheric, and it was also just sad, but like not really, but like sort of sweet too. Yeah, it was, I loved this book. Next book I read was Queenie. This book was okay. There were parts of it that I was like, this is fun, but then I guess I got a little bit bored. Next book I read was Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. This was pretty good. Yeah, I read it when I was a kid and I wanted to reread it, and it definitely wasn't as fun as I remembered it, but it was still like a good time, good winter reread. Next book I read was Red, White, and Royal Blue. I loved this book. Amazing. Very romantic. I definitely was hooked. Next book I read was The Science of Interstellar. This is written by the physicist who worked on the movie and was a producer on it, and wow, I feel like I learned a lot. I definitely didn't understand everything, because physics is a hard thing to think about, especially when you have no knowledge in physics whatsoever, like me. So, but it was still definitely very insightful, and I'm definitely going to do more reading because of it. Next book I read was A Wild Sheep Chase by Murakami. This was, I really enjoyed it. Definitely very weird, which I guess Murakami's known for. I don't know, I haven't read it. This is my first Murakami. But yeah, it was fun. It was definitely, I don't really know if I got everything or if there's like hidden meanings. I don't think I read it in like the most sort of like insightful manner, but it was still a fun time. Next book I read was The Searcher by Tana French. I enjoyed this. It takes place in like rural Ireland. Mystery element I wasn't very interested in, but it was still sort of like fun to read about and everything. So yeah, so those are all 128-ish books that I read. I feel like I definitely forgot to add some books to this list, but anyways, so those are all the books that I read in 2020. Now it is on to 2021. Happy New Year. Happy reading. Sorry for not being able to talk well about books. That's something I want to get better in, because a lot of books I like, but I don't really know why. I'm just like, that was amazing. But I definitely want to be able to get better at talking about books, which I should be, considering I am an English degree, but I might be dropping out of college. We'll see. I don't know. Okay, Happy New Year.